tonight. So you'll be aware that we've revised the guidance in terms of our events, and this session is specifically for yourselves tonight. So it's great to see everyone here, and also we've got the chat function, so please make sure you utilize the chat function, and if there are questions that we can answer, we will try our very best to answer those questions this evening. If there's something that we haven't managed to cover, maybe from time or just we haven't managed to fit it in, we will be updating an FAQ sheet and we'll send that around afterwards. The other thing to make you aware of as well is that we will record it. So for those people that couldn't attend tonight, we'll then be able to send them on afterwards. So hopefully no one will be able to miss that. So that'll be great. The good news is that we're much closer of getting back to events. We're just starting. Those of you will be aware that we've got a big event this weekend as well. So we're coming through the other side, and we're delighted to be able to do that. There is some guidance. We're also obviously following the Scottish Government advice. And just to give you an indication of how we do that, we are very privileged as a sport at the moment, and also as sports across all the governing bodies of sport, in that we've been given a fair amount of discretion for the amount of people we can have in our clubs and also at our events. You'll be aware that the Scottish Government the other week reduced the number of people to 6 people from 2 households. However, we can still have up to 30 people. So although we have been given that discretion, we have to make sure that we use that appropriately and remind people that, you know, when we are out on our club runs and when we are having events, that we do need to then be reflective or implement the other guidance from the Scottish Government when we go back into our day-to-day lives. But fantastic that the Scottish Government has recognised the value of sport, and especially getting everybody out in their houses for more physical activity. So that's good. So what we're going to do tonight is I am going to be Morven's trusted sidekick. I'm going to try and moderate the chat function. If there is questions that come up, Morven will come and I'll maybe throw a question to Morven. But as I say, if we don't manage to get to it, then we'll come back. The session is going to cover the guidance. Now, for those of you that did attend the events Organiser overview a few weeks ago, the guidance has been revised from that point in time, and Morven will cover off some of the changes. But we're going to go over the guidance. We're going to look at some of the event formats. We're going to look at some of the specifics with regards to coronavirus and what we're going to do to mitigate risk. We're going to look at how we're preparing to return, and then we're going to open it up at the end for a little bit of discussion. Now, you've all come here tonight to get the information and to listen to Morven rather than myself. So I'm going to thank you very much for attending. I'll do a little bit of a wrap up at the end, and I'm going to hand over to Morven now to go through the presentation. So thank you very much.
Perfect, thanks Paul. So it's lovely to see you all here tonight. Some of you I've seen various times digitally over the past couple of weeks and months, and for some of you it's the first time I've seen you in a wee while. So it's really nice to see everyone here tonight, and thank you for making the time to come along. Like Paul said, he's kind of set out roughly what we're going to do. What we'll run through is it's going to be about 20-25 minutes or so, given how quickly I talk. It could be any length of time. You're going to have to listen to me talking. I'm going to run you through the guidance. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I do trust that you're all you've read it numerous times by now, or you're all capable of going to read it. But I do want to just highlight 1 or 2 key areas, and I'll try not to pick things necessarily that we've gone over 1,000 times already on these webinars. And then hopefully that'll give us a good 25 minutes or so for a little bit of group discussion. I'm going to try and really hit my Zoom capacity tonight, and I'm going to try and do a poll and do breakout rooms. So if all of Zoom cuts out at any point, that could well be due to what I'm trying to Zoom, but we're going to see how it goes. So if I can manage to open up the polls to start off with, which is Zoom is testing me, so just give me a wee second. I just want to do a quick poll. I'm going to open back up Zoom. Give me 1 second, everyone. Polls, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to launch a poll. This is anonymous, and it isn't, I'm not going to pin you to this. I'm not going to sort of hand you on everything you say. I just want to ask you a poll on how confident you are about returning to officiating. So you've got the options there: extremely confident, reasonably confident, so-so, not very confident, or not at all confident. So it's just give me a wee bit of an idea of sort of where we're feeling in the room about sort of making that return to officiating at events again. Perfect, we've just got a couple more wee people answers come in. Fab. Okay, I'm going to end that poll there, and it should pop up on your screens. This is really me next level zooming it, so don't judge me based on my zoom skills. So as we can see from that, we're kind of all hovering in that middle area. Nobody's extremely confident, which I probably wouldn't have expected anyone to say at this stage. Most of us in and around that reasonably confident, so-so, or not very confident. I'm going to be totally honest, I'm not entirely expecting, I don't need to change your opinions in this hour-long webinar, so I'm not going to ask you that poll again at the end of this session, because I think I can change everyone's opinions from not very confident up to extremely confident in the space of an hour. It's just not possible. What I do want to, throughout the course of this session tonight, is just kind of help give you a wee bit more information, but let's just talk about things. Let's talk about things with our fellow officials and see how we're going. So, in terms of the guidance itself, perfect. So that guidance update, so it was last updated on the 11th of September, so we've got a pretty fresh version out there just now. So as a very quick oversight, we are now able to have competition again in Scotland. So that started at the end of August. On the 29th of August, we were able to have club confined time trials again, followed up with the 5th of September when open events were permitted from. So for those of you that are in the loop with what's happening down south, we're about 1 month behind where British cycling were in England. We're kind of been on a par with where Welsh cycling were. So I'm sure a lot of you will be fully aware, it's a bit of a funny time to start our season. It's where we're usually at the end of the season for some people. And I will touch a wee bit later on sort of what the end of 2020 is looking like. Just in terms of that guidance and what we can and can't do, races for senior riders, they've got to be limited to groups of 30 riders, and they can't come into contact with any other group of riders for the duration of that competition. So they've got to be 30 completely independent people, but they can race as a group. For the youth and the juniors, there is no group size limit, which is really good, but we still should be aiming to deliver the overall event with as few people as possible in attendance at any one time. Do appreciate that not having that group size limit and not being able to give you a definitive number, while it is great and it does offer a load of flexibility to the event organisers, it can be quite difficult and quite challenging to sort of use your own judgment about what is best and what's appropriate and what's suitable. We've been saying to all the event organisers, if anyone wants to discuss that with us, just get in touch with me in the events team. Likewise for yourselves as officials, if you're being asked to officiate on our event and we've got a youth or junior event that's got 200 kids all setting off at once and it doesn't feel right, just get in touch with us and we'll talk it through and see how it works. In terms of the physical distancing side of things, everyone over the age of 12, when they're not directly competing, should still be physical distancing. So that's really important. The exemption on physical distancing is only for the duration of the competition itself. So it's not in the car park, it's not in the warm-up on the rollers, it's not in the village hall when you're trying to get some tea and cake. It's only for the duration of racing that there is that exemption. So we're really, really lucky, as Paul says, that we've got this situation for sport whereby we're permitted to do so much more than we can do in wider society. However, as event organisers, officials and event delivery team, we do still need to make sure that we manage the people around us. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying that that is easy. One of the event organisers from down south did say that that non-race controlling people was like herding spiders. So take from that what you will, but we do appreciate how difficult this is going to be. But it is starting to become more and more part of what we do in day-to-day life. We all know that we queue with 2 metre distance between people. So the more people start to live it, I think if we can sort of just get it into them nice and early on from events that they do need to still do this too, that's where it's going to be easier. And just in terms of the events, everything at this point is non-ranking and there will be no ranking points. So that's sort of for our summer disciplines, sort of as we look into the winter, that's where this is going to start to change. We'll make sure with British Cycling we're totally up to date on how those things are looking. Just something for your information and something we're going to be sharing with the event organisers. We've created a behaviour code. We've basically taken the British Cycling one and proudly Spotified it and just made sure it's got all the Scottish terminology on it in terms of the test and protect system and physical distancing rather than social distancing. So this hopefully is going to be a really, really useful resource for the event organisers to get everywhere at their events. It's obviously got some of that formal stuff, the stuff that we're all knowing and living every day, but it's got that wee reminder to say thanks and to have fun that I think sometimes if we're all getting a wee bit caught up in this sort of return to competition, albeit we want it to be fun competition, we just want people to remember that it is still about fun at this stage. So just touching a wee bit on the event logistics side of things, and I think it's good for you guys as officials to be aware of this. We are suggesting to event organisers that everything should be online entry only, that we shouldn't have riders turning up on a day. One, from the point of view of its additional unnecessary physical contact, but also it means that you cannot control and manage your numbers. So wherever possible, everything should be online entry only. British Cycling have really helpfully updated the online entry process so that it now includes the rider declaration and additional COVID-19 information, which means that when a rider now enters and registers for an event on the British Cycling online system, they are agreeing to that rider declaration. That's that really small print at the top of the sign-on boxes. They're doing that when they enter the event, which means that we don't need people physically signing in boxes on sign-on sheets anymore. So it's a huge leap forward, and it's actually something that I think we've been all thinking about for a little while now, and it's something we've made the best of from the COVID situation. Just as we know, if you are officiating at any events which are using an external entry system, so for example, Entry Central or otherwise, there will still need to be that physical signature on the declaration form at this stage, just to make sure that box is fully ticked. So that's coming from British Cycling. In terms of the rider registration process, I've said that we don't need them physically signing the old-fashioned sign-on sheets. This can be done contract-free, and that would be the ideal route that we would go down. We don't really want 100 people touching a pen. It's quite a high-risk contact point. So there's a couple of options. There's electronic options via apps or texting option, or what's actually looking like the most preferred option across the board at this stage is manually, with one volunteer who's checking riders in as they arrive. What is looking like one of the most popular ways of doing this, and certainly down in England, has been sign on at point of entry at the car park. So when a car full of racers arrive, there's one volunteer standing there that does not stick their head in the car, however, is able to sort of find out who's in the car at that point, and at that point hand them their rider pack, whether that contains numbers, timing chips, race manuals, etc. So this is all just for your information. This is things that the event organizer and the event organizing team need to consider, but for you as officials, you do need to be aware that there's going to be a lot of very different processes happening at the back end of this year. That's just a wee reminder, that's your rider declaration. It's usually in tiny wee print at the top of the sign-on sheets, and the riders are now signing up for that. Another wee thing that I want to share with you all is the COVID-19 risk assessment. So this is up on the event organizer section of their dashboards, and this is a mandatory thing that needs to be submitted to British Cycling at least 7 days in advance of the event. This one is, there's also a COVID-19 planning tool that's not a mandatory document, and that's sort of to help event organisers determine the financial implications and any community implications. However, the COVID-19 risk assessment is a mandatory document, and we do expect the event organisers to upload it. So if anyone's sort of getting in touch with you, asking you any questions about this supplementary risk assessment, that's what this one is. I'll double check whether as event organisers you can get access to one of these, as commissaires, you've got access to one of these just to sort of familiarise yourselves with it, but it's a very standard risk assessment format in terms of British Cycling. Sorry, I'm not actually flicking through the notes in front of me, so I'm hoping I'm saying everything I've needed to. And just another couple of wee event organiser sort of logistic things. In terms of the numbers, as you guys will all know from operating events, numbers are absolutely essential. I am sure there's many of you who, like me, have stood at the side of a course on a finish line and been absolutely baffled as a bunch of small muddy children go past who've got long hair over numbers, who put a jacket on since they put their number on the back of their bike, they've changed their jerseys, and they've all got different numbers on from what they had. So we all know how important numbers are. However, we're all also quite aware that these are quite a high risk contact point, and they're sort of, we do need to find a way around it. So there's a couple of options here, and I did just want to share them as they're what we're advising event organisers, and I'd like you guys as the officials to sort of be aware of what we're saying. So there are some options that we've sort of come across either down south or through experience conversations, has been riders being able to print numbers at home prior to the event. Quite a lot of trust on that one, but if it works for sort of different levels of events, that may work. Also washing line formats, which has been utilised down south, whereby strings are ran between poles and all the numbers are pinned on. That one will need a few volunteers to make sure that the adult riders, particularly I would imagine, pick up the right numbers. Children I think would be fine with. Keep a close eye on them. And there is also riders being allocated the same number for the duration of the series, and where the onus is on them to bring that number back. It's really good actually, and I'm sure you guys as the officials will agree with me, that COVID is giving us quite a good opportunity to be stern with some riders and our ever forgetters that will always turn up without their numbers and their equipment. I've seen a lot of examples down south of events that are saying there's just no and it's COVID related. However, it's just good and people might start to be much better at remembering the future. In terms of movement, again, it's an event organiser logistic, but you guys as officials might well be asked for a wee bit of support and advice in this sort of area. So we're advising for one-way systems where possible, marking out rider pens that can be used between races. There's some really good examples of rider pens, particularly in the world of BMX, where this is a bit more of a done format anyways. So some of the BMX events that are coming back down in England, they're using these rider pens and they're using them well, particularly thinking about rider groupings and family groupings that are going to be arriving together that you can pull. We're hoping that event organisers are going to be able to schedule arrival and departure times. I'll touch on groups a wee bit later because again, we'll touch into these event formats. And the most important thing is clear communication. We need the event organisers to making sure that all the riders, everyone involved in the delivery of the event, and all you guys as the officials know exactly what's going to be happening, when and how, because it's just so crucial at this stage. And the final wee thing in terms of these event organisers, second to last thing, is a wee bit on the course setups. Again, from your point of view as officials, this is an area that you guys do tend to support in and around that start-finish area, the arena and the venue staging. We're going to have to consider the start grids and the finish line and how we can accommodate riders, particularly with children. If there's going to be parents gathering that are with those children taking jackets, how we can provide the maximum area in order to enable physical distancing and avoiding groupings where possible. Similarly, with alternative event formats, which we've seen a few event organisers being keen to try out, there will be differences to the way that you maybe usually would lay out a start grid and the way a cyclocross race with a field of 120, the space that would usually take up. At this stage, we're just looking at a totally different beast entirely. So there's just a few wee things to sort of get thinking about, be open to those discussions with the event organisers. Where possible, we're saying that equipment use should be reduced. However, that doesn't mean that we should be having courses which is just someone standing and pointing someone off in a vague direction of a forest. However, you may see some different ways in terms of that course delineation and signage, whereby we're not putting out 300 electric fence stakes with rolls of tape that everyone's having to touch. So again, speak to the event organiser, make sure that you're all comfortable with sort of any alternative measures, things that are a wee bit different in the COVID world. And we may see course adaptations. So it might not be the cross-country Olympic course that you usually would see. We might see adults racing on dirt kits. So it's just to kind of prepare you that these are the things that we are talking to event organisers about. And finally, just in terms of those groups, as I said earlier on, we are suggesting that events organised with as few people in attendance as possible at any one time. So that doesn't necessarily mean we have to have tiny events. It's just that we can be rotating smaller numbers of people throughout the day. There's some really good examples that I've been sharing on previous webinars from the Bovingdon Bomber Crit series down in London, and also the Southern XC, who are also based down south. They've returned and they've got a very good system of having A and B car parks, etc. So again, we might see that up here. So we're just re-emphasising that we should try and think about that people flow, groupings, and how the event organisers actually facilitate that. And I think the last point there is probably one of the most important things. We do expect all volunteers and spectators to physically distance at all times, wherever possible. So that's really important. We just can't have big groups of spectators, big groups of event volunteers, and that is going to be one of the most difficult parts of the day to manage, but we do have faith that it is going to be possible. Paul, how's the chat looking at this stage, just before I go into event formats?
Chat is looking very good. There's been a good question from Kevin there, which I'm going to put to you. So Kevin's asked if there's any appetite amongst organisers to put on events. So I think a little reflection as to how many events we've got, Marvin, what those events are. And yep. I suppose that the important bit that Kevin's asking there is you've had a lot of discussions with the event organisers over this time. So just to give a flavour of how people are feeling, I think would be useful.
Yeah, for sure. So we've been having quite a few conversations with event organisers, and I think I've not actually done a Zoom poll because that is new technology for tonight. You guys were my little guinea pigs. They're in a very similar position to you yourselves. Nobody's extremely confident. Most people are floating around that kind of confident so-so level. However, it's when you sort of pull in the thoughts and views and feelings of the wider event organising team in the community that number of kind of a little bit confident and so-so's kind of all brings it down to a not very confident. I think that's possibly what's happening, is that a slightly reduced level of confidence is bringing the overall level of confidence down rather than bringing it up. I think once there's one set of worries, that worry spiral with the additions and more, which is absolutely fine. We've been quite clear from the start that for us this year, and the back end of 2020, it's very much an opt-in approach for the event organisers and also for yourselves as officials, where we're absolutely putting no pressure on anyone to do anything particularly that they don't feel comfortable with or that might affect their community negatively. So in terms of the number of events that we're looking at the moment on the calendar, I've got about 5 events, which is pretty small. However, there might be sort of a wee bit of growth once we see those first 2 events happening. So we've got a downhill this weekend, and then a downhill in 2 weekends' time up at Glencoe. We then got a hill climb in the middle of October, followed up by a couple of fun cyclocross races at the end of October. So those are the ones that I definitely have confirmation of. Having conversations with a few other people, there are people who are keen to do things. I'm sure some of you, if you've been speaking to event organisers, or those of you that are event organisers yourselves, you'll also know that venue permissions are really difficult at the moment. People are really, really struggling to get landowner consent. They're even struggling to speak to the landowners themselves, particularly in council areas and forestry where people have maybe been off on furlough and are still not back. So there's a lot that needs to come together to make the events happen, which is quite a long way of saying there's not many events at this stage, but I'm kind of hoping we might just get a wee bit more growing, just a wee bit more local racing. I'm not in a position that I think we should be having great big 400 people mass big events. It's kind of just getting that little bit of local competence growing that might sort of just help other things happen.
Great, thank you very much, Marvin. There's one more that's coming from Jan. So Jan's asking about the use of masks at events. So could you cover off where we are with that?
Yeah, so Fraser actually answered this very nicely on Tuesday night for me. Fraser Johnson, who works in our club team, is definitely our COVID and guidance guru at Scottish Cycling. We don't have them as mandatory at any point within the event. However, you should follow the government guidance sort of with regards to the mask wearing, and where that physical distancing is not possible, you should wear a mask. So particularly around that first aid provision where possible. Obviously, first aid still needs to be delivered one way or another. Where possible, the person receiving the first aid and first aid delivery should be wearing masks. And again, it's within the lines of your own comfort. For example, the person that's doing sign-on, that's meeting and greeting all the cars, they might want to wear a mask for their own selves and for other people. But we're not making it mandatory sort of in any additional respect other than what the Scottish Government guidance says. Perfect. Okay, what I'll do is I'll move on to the event formats. There's going to be loads of time for discussion later if I talk nice and quickly through the event formats, and we've covered a wee bit of them already. So I kind of touched on it just in terms of that event format. There's a good chance you're going to see creative event formats and things that are slightly different. I was touching on the cyclocross races at the end of October. With them being on the 31st of October, as you might imagine, I think they're going to have a wee bit of fun that goes alongside them. All races are categorised as non-ranking at the moment. We're actively pushing the Go race formats. So we might see more things around about time trials, skills challenges, staggered starts, A and B format racing. It's a really good opportunity actually for event organisers to try something a wee bit different, something they wouldn't normally be able to incorporate into their race programme. But we're seeing a lot of demand out there. Riders we know want to race. We did a survey, it had 880 responses. I think a lot of you would have replied to it sort of near the start of lockdown, and there was an overwhelming response from riders that they wanted to get back racing. So this is where we're just urging a wee bit of caution from the event organisers themselves, just to make sure that they don't get overwhelmed and they have carefully planned out sort of what they're thinking of doing. We did a webinar on Tuesday night, Fraser and myself, around the Go formats. So there's something that is in, particularly with the non-ranking events. So that's the Go Ride Racing and then the Go Race formats. They don't need officials, they're overseen by sort of the coaches, and they're something that we've not done very much up in Scotland, which is a bit of a missed opportunity, and we're hoping this might sort of help us rejuvenate a wee bit. These events do not require a commissaire. They're not overseen by an event official. They're looked after by the coaches for the Go Ride Racing. However, in terms of the learning outcomes, it is possible for a commissaire to attend them. We've heard this before, that at the Go Ride Racing events, it's actually a really good learning outcome, particularly for the kids. When they see you guys there in your greys, you're someone to look at, you're someone different, and you actually get to give them that pre-race briefing in a slightly different scenario. So you're definitely not there to oversee the racing, and if these events do pop up and they're tag-alongs to other ones, you can be there, but just remember they're not yours to officiate at. You don't need to be responsible for them. So it's not working. And I've kind of covered this one off. This is just sort of in what we're expecting. I've ran through those events already, so I'm not going to waste time on those. What I do want to touch on though is the event COVID-19 officer, and I think this is something that probably for you as the officials there's going to be some questions around, because you're there to ensure that the racing is safe and fair, and ultimately that role has not changed for you with any of this additional guidance or any of these additional measures. What we do have is the event COVID-19 officer. This is a bit of a standard role, and we've got it for club and activity, and it's quite an important part in the guidance document that this is what differentiates our organised sporting activity from just going up and meeting up with your mates in the park, is this having this event COVID officer role. So basically, their responsibilities are to ensure that everyone's aware of and adhere to the guidance. So this is the person that is responsible for making sure that people know where they need to physically distance. They know how they can do that and making sure it does actually happen. Obviously, this person is not the police. They are not going to be able to drag people kicking and screaming it away from other people if it asks on their faces. So just to be absolutely clear, that's not what we're asking people to do, but this person is responsible for sort of making sure that happens and sort of having that call to work with the event organiser and the officials to sort of know when things might be starting to sort of cause some issues. This is also the person that's responsible for sort of putting in place the necessary COVID processes. So whether that's alternative sign-on formats, it's alternative parking, different ways of doing registration, etc. That's this person's role and responsibility. Again, they need to make sure all the information is communicated out to the riders and volunteers. That doesn't necessarily mean that this person does it themselves. It just means that they're the one responsible for making sure that that COVID communication is inside the event handbook one way or another, or that it's being disseminated somehow. They're going to be involved with the test and protect information, making sure that contact details are there. Very important. We obviously get all the riders runs when they sign up. It's even more important to make sure that we get the contact details of all the people involved in the event delivery team. So that's all of the volunteers and all of you guys as the event officials to make sure we get those. And finally, this person will be responsible for liaising with the local authorities and the landowners. So that's a role. There's Sport Scotland training for it. At the moment, the Sport Scotland training is very club focused because that's obviously the grounds in which they operate. But that's the course that we're using. If I'm totally honest, the tracker, our event tracker that you get lovely semi-automated emails from, it has had 6 months off. So it's just taken a wee bit of time to get its head back into the work zone, as I'm sure we all would after 6 months off. So we've not got that set up to track this, but it is something that we're sort of requesting event organisers need to have in place because this is very important in terms of that guidance. Paul, is there anything from the chat just before I go into the final section before the discussion?
There is actually a lot of comments in the chat, Marvin. You did such a good job answering the first set of questions, and everyone's throwing them in for the second set.
Thank you, everyone.
What I should say is we'll probably go through some of them. We might not be able to answer them all. Some of them are going to take us slightly away from the key focus off, and I can see people are still commenting some stuff. So Amanda's asked the question about the technical difference in the mini downhill. However, what I would say to that one is that takes us away from events to specific events. So we will come back to Amanda and answer that one, but we'll not do it here. Underneath it, so Helen's asked about the track and trace app. Now there is the test and protect protocols, and I probably didn't do a very good job of explaining at the start how our guidance is authorised. So what we have to do is we wait for the Scottish government announcements and work closely with Sport Scotland. So the guidance that we provide is essentially Scottish Government approved, and that means that we have to comply with the test and protect protocols. So in terms of the guidance, Helen, the registration for the events are the test and protect protocols that the Scottish Government want to see implemented. The track and trace app is not part of that. They have not requested that. So there isn't a requirement at this point in time for the track and trace app. Sorry, Marvin, I seem to have answered that one on your behalf, but I'm sure you'll be glad of a break and a cup of water. So let's have a little look. So we've got one here. So the National Stakes happening at Westmoreland. Do you foresee we will, I'm not quite sure the wording there, about 1 month later about hosting events of bigger numbers? I think Andrea's put a question in. In fact, Andrea, it's probably better to throw that back to you. If you want to unmute your mic. You've asked a question there about Westmoreland. You just want to ask that question?
I'm just thinking with the numbers of, I'll do this first, you might be able to hear me. I'm just thinking with the numbers of competitors that's going to be at Westmoreland, you're looking in excess of 500. that if we're about a month behind in Scotland, what is that going to look like a month after Westmoreland? Are we likely to be opening up to the normal field sizes at cyclocross and any other events that happen over the winter?
Yeah, I can answer that one. It's all a bit of unknown actually into the future. We've sort of been tracking about a month or so behind England in terms of the return. However, we've sort of plateaued a little bit in terms of that. We're all looking at 6 from 2 sort of across both England and Scotland and Wales, as far as I'm aware. So I'm not 100% sure sort of the outcomes after that Westmoreland Trophy, this National Trophy cyclocross event, and where that's going to sort of leave everything that sort of goes on after that. But I think it'll be really interesting one to sort of see how they put in place the measures and the mitigations for such a large scale event. It's definitely going to be one of the biggest ones back.
Yeah, because I know there's been a lot of restrictions as far as putting pits areas out, etc. Between DCMS and BC, etc. There seems to be there's a mix of what they think should be happening, what shouldn't be happening. So there's still a lot of questions over Westmoreland. So I just want to make sure that when we eventually are able to put on something a bit bigger, more I know the our national cyclocross isn't happening, but something a bit bigger, that we know what we are doing moving forward between DCMS, BC and SC.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely something we're constantly reviewing the guidance, and we'll make sure that we're making sure we're sort of as thorough as possible in that one.
Cool, thank you.
Perfect. Right, what I'll do is I'm going to run through this next section. Any questions in the chat box, I will get to them. I'll have a wee look once I pop you guys in the breakout rooms. I'll have a wee run through the chat box and see what we're looking like as well, if I can get the breakout rooms to work. So hold your hats for that one, because that'll be coming up soon. Just before that, I want to touch on the preparing to return bit, because ultimately that is where we hope we're going to be before too long. Is we're either going to have you guys back out in your greys, or we're going to have events happening. But most importantly, and I cannot stress this enough, before you guys commit to anything, before you guys sort of start thinking about that, I want you to think about you. Think about your own personal set of circumstances, your own personal fears, worries, concerns, but also your own excitement about getting back to things. Think about anything that might sort of affect you being able to return to the officiating. And ultimately, I do not want anyone to feel pressurised to sort of take back on this role. If it has been a really difficult 6 months or so, it's been all living and breathing this, and there's been a lot going on. So I'm not saying I don't want to see you guys again, because I cannot wait to see you all again, but just do make sure you think about you. Do what's right by you, do what's right by your family. And if you do have any difficulties, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I know you all quite well. Don't feel like you need to go into loads of personal detail, but if you do want to get in touch and chat anything through with me, you've all got my email address, you've all got the events email address. Just let me know, and particularly once we do get to the stage of events happening up again, if there's any difficulties and if you do feel pressurised, just get in touch and I'll see what I can do to help out. But all being well, and if you do think that you are ready to come back, communication is going to be so important as we work through this, both with the event organiser but also with ourselves. Stay in touch with me, let me know how things are going. Please make early contact with the event organisers so as soon as possible. We will also be saying this to the event organisers because there is additional documentation to review. We will have alternative event formats. Things won't be quite as they used to be, and we do all need to make sure that we're fully aware and comfortable with this fact. You're going to be there to help support, to review those plans and documentation. Again, if there's anything that you're sort of being asked by the event organisers, you're a bit unsure of it, do come and ask me. However, I am not the all-knowing oracle. I am living this as much as you guys are, learning things as we go. And if I don't know the answers, I'll try and find out the answers from somewhere. But please don't hesitate to get in touch with us at all. When you're having that communication with event organisers, and I know you're all very good at sending it, but please make sure it's as clear as possible and you're honest and open with them. If something doesn't feel right, let them know. If you've got a different way of doing something, again, let them know. This is new, we're all learning it together. And if you're the chief comm, just make sure the whole event delivery team knows the plan and structure. So if you're working with any trainees who've maybe been out of the loop for a good year or so, particularly for some people, just make sure that everyone's as aware as possible of what's going to happen on the day and anything that might be slightly different to usual. Just in terms of those technical regulations, casting our minds back to the last time we used them, which might have been quite quite a wee while ago now. They were updated for 2020, so it was a big update that we did with British Cycling. All of our regs have combined, and we've now got the general section plus the discipline specific sections. Pretty sure you're all aware of it. However, if you've not used them yet, I would recommend just going and having a wee look back through, a wee refresh, because they did change, and I can imagine not many of you will have used the new version of the regulations. So just that quick reference, we all know exactly where we would usually flick to in the old handbook to find the rules that we needed. They might not be quite where you're expecting. It's not a big one, but it's just to help put you at ease and make you feel a wee bit more comfortable, just as a reminder. This is one, given I'm still working from home, I've not had to do yet. Some of you guys might have started going back to work. You probably want to pack your work bag for being an official again. In these past 6 months, your Commissaire bag might have turned into a hill walking bag, a dog walking bag, a going out exploring bag. It's going to have to be an official's bag again. There is an expectation to be self-sufficient, so please do make sure if you've got it, you take your own hand sanitizer, your own food, your own drinks. I keep saying things aren't going to be like what they were before, and I don't want that to come across negatively, but it is just to highlight whereby previously you'd be getting vouchers for some of you to go and eat your lunch at an event, or they'd be giving you bottles of water. That might just not happen. Again, through that communication with the event organiser, you're going to know what the situation is, but make sure your bag's nice and packed. Where possible, please do not share your equipment. So again, communication with your event organising team and your event official team early on. Make sure that everyone's got what they are going to need for the duration of the day, and how can you try and avoid that cross-contamination and sharing of resources. Dig out your greys, because I know you guys will all be buzzing about getting back into those. My life has had decidedly less people walking around in grey uniforms since we've all been separate, and pack up all your officiating equipment and resources. I know I'm preaching to the people that know exactly what they're doing. You lot are all far more organised than I am, but just makes you feel good about bringing things back. And finally, organise your plans. Again, I don't want to sound like I'm being patronising, but it's just thinking of those processes that might be different to previously. We all know we've all got events that we just go to over and over again, and we do exactly the same thing. You drive to an autopilot, you park on autopilot, you go and see registration, everything's the same as it is. It is going to be a wee bit different. There's going to be things that happen differently. So just make sure you're fully aware. If you need to park in a different place to usual, what the arrival is going to be like. Are you going to have to depart at a set time? Are you going to be departing in staggered waves, etc.? Plan your journey. This might be more for the food orientated among you. Make sure the McDonald's drive-through that you go on your way to the event in the morning is actually opening at the time it used to, because I know some things are on staggered hours. And just know where you need to be and when, and what roles you're going to be carrying out. So you guys all know this. I don't want to patronise you, but it's just that wee reminder that things will be slightly different, but we're all totally capable of taking it in our strides when we do feel ready to return. Perfect. And Paul, is there anything in the chat box, or will we get into our discussions?
Yeah, there's definitely some conversations about waterproof jackets, but I think, Morgan, what we'll do is we'll look at the questions, and then we can have a chat and then feedback to everyone after the groups.
So I hope that was really valuable discussion that you were able to have with your fellow commissaires there and officials. What it would be great to do would just be to bring back from each group a wee bit of a common answer, some of the common themes that were taking place. So breakout room 1, I'm not sure if it showed you what number breakout room you were. Colin Chisholm, you've unmuted yourself and you were in that room. So have you got, just for sort of sharing with the whole group, sort of what the key themes were from that breakout room?
Yeah, can do. We had a really good conversation. There's nothing worse when you're in a breakout room with 4 like-minded people. Our concerns collectively, catching the virus, spreading the virus, as in we'll have a race, people come, shake hands, cuddle, because that happens, you know, spreading the virus, or which we find quite incredulous, is that others coming into the area from further away. So, for example, comms coming from down south in England to up north in Scotland, or vice versa, you know, to try and get people, whether it's organisers talking to other comms instead of going through some kind of coordination, or, you know, people from the central belt racing the northeast, northwest leagues, and then coming up and doing the Halloween one in October. you know. That was the kind of downside. That was the concerns. Yep. One of the other concerns is it's possible a little bit early to be thinking about racing in big numbers and the potential risks. So that was 4. The good things we're looking forward to. If you take the concerns to the side, racing, meeting people, and actually getting back and refreshing their knowledge, because it's been, you know, there's been no road, there's been no mountain bike, there's been no cross, there's been no track, there's been nothing. So it's just, you know, people are now 7 or 8 months of no com work, and it's just things are just getting a little bit rusty.
Yep. No, that's really good. Thanks, Colin.
I think I captured everything.
It's okay, unless nobody else from your room unmutes yourselves, then I trust that you have. So room 2, did you guys have a spokesperson, just sort of the same as Colin, the concerns?
I think that's me.
Fab. Thanks, Jan.
So our downsides were very similar to group 1. And if something happens at an event, someone tests positive, and then everyone at that event has to self-isolate, what reputational damage will that do to Scottish cycling and to cycling in general? So we have to be really careful, and that led us on to, well, will everyone, competitors, spectators, volunteers, officials, actually follow the COVID regulations? Because from our everyday lives, you know, some people do seem to be relaxing quite a bit, and as a group we felt that we can't relax.
Yep.
So those were the negatives. Positives were that we are, like group 1, we are desperate to get back to officiating, and in my personal case I'm desperate to get back to road races so I can qualify. But that's not going to happen for a while. But yeah, we are desperate to get back to officiating, to helping these races happen, to working with our fellow commissaires, and so really looking forward to that when it can happen. And that's it.
That's fab. Thanks, Jan. It's really nice, actually. It's really helpful for me. I'll just interject before I come on to room 3. It's really helpful for me to kind of hear some of these concerns, because they do help me sort of build up a picture of where we're at, plan a wee bit, but also think of what else we can do as a group going forward to maybe sort of try and alleviate some of those things and work together and sort of discuss them a bit more. But the positives, I'm so excited as well to see you all again and to be able to share hopefully something of the winter season with you all. Room 3, have you got a spokesperson, please? Who was in room 3? Room 3. Is there anyone in room 3, or did you guys all just go to the pub?
No.
Yeah, I see. Because
Thanks,
you're always picking on the quiet one. Yeah, Colin might not have problems with coronavirus, but problems with his drink going the wrong way. Right. Well, we had indeed also similar discussions, probably a bit along group 2 as well, with adhering of different groups of people to the corona rules, and probably also thinking about, well, we know there are different experiences as commissaires with organizers. There are some organizers that are very good in putting on an event, and there are other organizers who struggle already putting on an event in the right way when there is no COVID-19 around, and how confident we may be on officiating at an event that would be put on by such an organizer. The other point was about a concern about the non-restriction of numbers for youth races, where again we see that we can have a fairly good control over sort of the race bubble, the youth riders, but what's going on outside with a large number of parents might be might be a different concern. Now, that's in principle, of course, not our business, but probably, although we haven't, it wasn't spoken out, but I think along the lines, as Jan said, if things go wrong, then it is about the reputation of the event and Scottish cycling in the end. And yes, we would all love to be, of course, out and be around bike riders and races and our fellow commissaires again as soon as we can, and it's safe to do so.
Thank you very much, Henrik. It's really useful for me to see those the concerns and the positives, the things that you are excited about. I'm just aware, I'm just going to note that we are at 8 p.m. So if you do need to dash off, I won't be offended if I start seeing that number of participants dropping off. We'll probably only need 5 to 10 more minutes. If you guys are okay to stay on, I'll just keep talking a wee bit longer. You guys all know me, I could talk to the brick walls anyway. So if you all leave and I'm left on my own in the room, it's fine. But yeah, no, it's been really useful for me to see these positives and negatives. And I would like to probably follow up on some of these and maybe spend a little bit more time as we go forward, and maybe actually investigate some of these a little bit further. This has been the first time that I've touched base with a lot of you sort of directly as we've gone through this, and it is sort of natural as we're about to get to that return to racing time. So I've got a note of all those, and I will look into them a little bit further, and I hope you find that useful to discuss that in groups with people. I did have somewhere. Oh, perfect. So I just had a wee look through the chat box there while you guys were in your breakout rooms. So it'd be good to, I just sort of want to pick up on some of the things that I saw there. And obviously there's some of the questions that we've already addressed that we will pick up later on in the sorry, making notes while I speak, can't multitask. We'll pick up later with you guys separately if we need to, or sort of wider as a group. So there was a point raised about shouting at the events. So yes, we have recommended that where possible you are not shouting. I think that's common across all areas. You're not supposed to shout, to sing, to raise your voices. What we are recommending is where possible megaphones, microphones. Another thing that we have advised in the guidance is that as much of your pre-race briefing as possible takes place in that race manual that goes out to the riders, or it's transmitted to them at sign-on, not transmitted, terrible choice of words. It's told to them at sign-on. So there's different ways of doing it, meaning that you guys don't need to stand at the edge of a big group of 30 riders and be having to yell information at them. That should be kept as short as possible. There was a really good question actually about cancelling the events if sort of guidance isn't being adhered to and things are getting a bit out of hand. That decision would come from a conversation between yourselves as the official, the COVID officer for the event, and the event organiser. Ultimately, you guys are there to make sure the racing is safe and fair, and you guys know exactly how to do that in terms of the racing itself. It is the stuff that goes alongside it that is a bit more difficult. I have heard from event organisers in England that it is that stuff that goes around the event that is the most difficult. It's controlling the parents, it's controlling the riders when they're not racing, etc. And that's one of the most challenging areas, and I'm not going to lie, it is really tricky. What we need to be able to do is we need to put as much in place to allow people to follow the guidance and follow the restrictions appropriately. We can't fundamentally police them. However, if necessary, that is the step that will have to be taken. If an event is not safe anymore, and it's not safe, as you guys will all know, in terms of the racing, in terms of the terrain, in terms of the weather, it can also not be safe in terms of the COVID measures. However, hopefully we won't get to that point. There was also a question about whether we know whether commissaires are willing to officiate or not. No, we haven't actually done a poll on who's ready to get back into racing or not, because things are constantly changing, and I know that if I ask someone tomorrow, they might say no, they're not ready, but then they might actually be ready. Things might go back and forth. So I'm not going to absolutely pin you all up on the basis of me asking you one day whether you're ready to come back or not. For the events that we've got coming up at the back end of the year, we have got officials to cover them, so that's great. And again, it's just through conversation with you guys as officials and the event organisers, sort of know if we have got any areas that we really are struggling for people to come back in. And finally, there was a question about people travelling out with their regions, people travelling from large areas, and people travelling from areas which have got local lockdowns. Again, and it's not a great answer, but it is the answer we have. We're not here to police people. In the same way that someone from Aberdeen couldn't go and visit their wee granny for a bit, myself, I live in Lanarkshire, I can't go into other people's houses. People need to follow those rules themselves. If people go in and visit their wee granny when they're not supposed to, we can't police that. It's exactly the same way. We need to inform riders that they should not be travelling if they're from a region which is in sort of any sort of localised lockdown. And it will also be within the subtle nuances of that local lockdown and local restrictions, because they have all been slightly different. In terms of the online entry system, it's not possible to restrict it to riders from a certain region, because the difficulty we've got is when people are on the borders of one region or another. So someone might be situated within Perth, which is within our northeast region, but actually all their local racing is in Stirling, which is east and central region. So British Cycling, we discuss it back and forth whether we could put geographical restrictions, but it was just seen that it would not be possible, and it just wouldn't really be beneficial to sort of it would be detrimental to the riders themselves. And just in terms of I've seen some examples of good practice. What I'll do is I'll put in the FAQs. I've got some really good examples from event organising. I've got regular catch-ups with British Cycling and Welsh Cycling, so I'm going to try and get some more Commissaire examples for you guys as officials now these things are back up and running. And I will get as much as I can share with you. But some of the event examples are really good, and you'll just be able to take a wee bit of reading and learning from them. I'll try and pop them up in the chat just before we go, and if I don't manage to do that, I'll share them in the FAQs, which I'll email out to you all through the MailChimp, which you should be getting. And I think, having had the chat open there, which is why you see me get a lot more distracted than the rest of the night, because I've had the chat open in front of me. In terms of the events, I'm using words. Commissaire appointments, no, they're done through the event organisers this year. We had that provision that was how it was going to happen for certain events this year anyways. So we're going to support the event organisers where necessary, and we'll be working with the event organisers to help get the commissaires in place whereby they're struggling. Okay, and if I can get back onto my slides, almost exactly on time. Are we next steps? Have a wee think. Like I said, this is about you. You guys know you better than we do. We're not here to force you to do anything. It is not right. It's not appropriate for yourselves. However, for those of you that do want to come back, we can't wait to see you back, and to have you guys in the Grays at our events again is just going to be wonderful, really. Get in touch with me on the events email address. It's the best way to get a hold of me, because it means that if I'm not there, someone else can always pick it up. If you've got any further questions or specific questions, or you just want to run anything by me, like I said, I'm not the all-knowing guru or oracle of this, but if I don't know something, I will know people who might know, and we'll be able to find it out for you. You might not be the only person that's sat at home wondering something, so please do share it, and we can sort of get an answer and share it with the wider community where appropriate. And ideally, we'll have you attending future webinars. I found them really effective over the past couple of weeks now. We've started doing them again. You'll also be aware that British Cycling have started doing them, so some of you might be attending British Cycling's one next week as well, that they're doing regular monthly webinars. So it's definitely where we're at in the world, and hopefully I'll see you on one again soon. And finally, thank you all for attending. I'm going to hand back to Paul.
No, thank you very much, Marvin, and thank you to everyone for attending. I hope you found that valuable this evening. It's certainly valuable for us just to get everyone together, to hear the conversations, and to Jan, to Hendrik and Colin for feeding back from the groups. That was absolutely fantastic, and I think it's good for everyone else to hear how everyone's feeling as well. Now, as Marvin said, this isn't just the one-off. We want to do more of these, so we'll be getting in touch with people soon, just to reach out to see where we should be taking it. And as Marvin says, there's also some of the examples of best practice that we'd like to show you as well. Some of those went down really, really well when we held the event organizer one, so definitely we'll look to share those with you. Just a big thanks to Marvin as well, just to make most of you aware, if you're not aware already, Scottish Cycling is not alone in utilising the job retention scheme at this time. So we've got a few of our events team staff on furlough at the moment. So Marvin has been keeping the good ship Scottish Cycling sailing forward. So a big thanks to Marvin, and she's also been instrumental in producing the guidance that we're now using as the basis for tonight's webinar. So a big thanks to Marvin as well. Normally I would wish you a pleasant journey home. However, I think most of you have only got the kitchen to walk to put the kettle on. So at this point, I'll wish you a very pleasant evening, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thanks very much.
Cheers, guys.
Everyone.